What's happening, Bills Mafia? Ryan Thomas is back for a live edition of the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Of course, live, meaning you guys tune in, you guys fire away your questions on what I will be discussing tonight as a very important topic within this Buffalo Bills offseason as we lead in to training camp. Training camp is right down the road. It's going to be here before we know it. And of course, I'm feeling pretty confident in a lot of things pertaining to the Buffalo Bills and the moves that they've made. I feel like my confidence far outweighs some that I read on Twitter and some that I read on Facebook and some that I read on Instagram, which is A-okay. That's what this is all about. Agree to disagree, good, bad, whatever, however people feel about this offseason. That's what makes this sport, the sport of football, the game of football, the National Football League, that much more entertaining when people have completely differing opinions from one another. So the way that I see it is that this offseason is going to be one that will be a product of itself, within itself. What we see in training camp, what we see in the preseason has kind of already been laid out based upon the moves that the Bills have made this offseason. And that's just an objective standpoint, an objective perspective, I should say, that I think competition, it's safe to say, with a roster that's undergone X amount of changes, with what I've referred to as a true youth movement of changes, I foresee that as, okay, well, if we got all these new players here coming through, then that means the competition will be had because we got a lot of new players. We're going to have to find out which ones are ready to take the mantle from guys like Jordan Poyer, which guys are ready to take the position from, let's just say, backup running back or wide receiver, or obviously the elephant in the room, replacing a guy production-wise at the level of a Stephon Diggs. So a lot of things are going to be answered as far as our questions that we are going to have. And that's exciting. And in the process of that, I wanted to kind of dedicate tonight's show to that simple concept that there will be a lot of change. There will be a lot of new players coming in here. We'll have to figure out who's who, meaning who can be the free safety number one, who can be the strong safety number one, who can be the low risk, high reward signing of the offseason and actually be that high reward. And the Bills have made a lot of moves. I was on vacation. I was in Orlando with my girlfriend for a few days, and we were walking to the elevator to go downstairs to go to Disney. We went to Hollywood Studios for a day, and that day was the day that the Buffalo Bills announced that they had signed Gable Steveson. And this is a signing that, a lot of us look at and say, this is an Olympic wrestler turned NFL defensive lineman. How is this going to work? And I really feel like I could give an accurate assessment of the name of the player far more than most, because I've followed Gable Steveson for the majority of his career. I followed Gable Steveson really since the beginning of his collegiate wrestling career. So I know that this guy is a new football player. I know that this guy is somebody that really wanted this opportunity and talked to multiple teams, not just the Bills, but the Kansas City Chiefs. Rumors swirling around that he worked out in front of a lot of other teams. So this was a situation that, truthfully, I knew it would materialize into something. I knew that something would happen in the near future with Gable Steveson in regards to his NFL career. Did I expect the Buffalo Bills of all teams to kick the tires on this kid and make this move? Not necessarily. But once the move is announced, once the signing kind of seeps in, it's pretty apparent as to how the Bills made this happen. The wrestling connection, the Sean McDermott wrestler, the Gable Steveson wrestler, the fact that Brandon Beane has proven time and time again, Bill's general manager, that is Brandon Beane, of course, that he will do whatever it takes to sign a player just to see what he's got. There's no stone left unturned when it comes to, at this point in the offseason, especially a player that is as inexpensive as Gable Steveson is and is going to be. Brandon Beane is going to make that move at this point 10 times out of 10. And it's a move that I think is an interesting one. The position choice of being a defensive lineman is an interesting one. It would kind of fall in line with the skill sets that he's shown as a collegiate wrestler, and not just any collegiate wrestler, but one of the greatest collegiate wrestlers of all time, as well as an Olympian wrestler that achieved the highest of heights within that sport, which I know a thing or two about. It's the toughest sport that there is. It's even tougher than football. It's even tougher than baseball. It's a sport where you take a mentality from within it, you can apply it to virtually anything. I apply it to things work-wise. If you're once a wrestler, I say you're always a hard worker. So, of course, taking that mentality to wrestling, collegiately, to Olympic wrestling, to trying out for the WWE, that didn't work out for the reasons that it didn't for Steveson. Maybe he wasn't the on-the-mic guy that Dwayne Johnson became, or maybe he wasn't the presence that they wanted in that arena, in that entertainment entity. But football doesn't really necessarily need him to be that. He needs to be a guy that comes into training camp, that produces hard-working results and shows an evolution amongst his peers. Because don't forget, the training camp preseason point of emphasis for Gable Steveson is that he has to be at the top of his game while competing for a roster spot amongst his peers and amongst his, his you could say teammates, contemporaries, counterparts, whoever it may be. I look at it as he's not only competing against the teammates that he's playing with, but he's competing to show that he's capable of being picked up by another team if, in fact, it doesn't work out for him with the Buffalo Bills. I happen to think that the skills can easily translate, but I also know very well that going into a locker room in a sport that you've never competed in against guys that have competed in the sport for a number of years is a hard ask, is a hard thing to do because I did do it with wrestling. I started wrestling late, got into wrestling late. I'm wrestling with guys that have won, sectional tournaments. I'm wrestling with guys, drilling with guys that have had accomplished, 100-win careers when I hadn't even had 5. So it's intimidating, and it's intimidating to put yourself in that element. But when you have a work ethic like Gable Steveson does, I think those skills can kind of be honed and translate. The tough part about this is, and this is the tough circumstance that I think is actually somewhat, dare I say, plagued the Bills over the last, 3-4 years, is that being a good team can sometimes work against you in the sense of competition, where now the Bills have more openings, yes, but maybe they feel more comfortable in August with some of the guys that they've had all along the defensive line. Maybe they feel that, hey, we're going to go in this direction at that time in the near future rather than go with Gable Steveson. And Gable ends up on the practice squad, which I think that's a realistic scenario. But within that, another team could come along, another team could pluck him away from the Buffalo Bills, just like the Bills experienced last season with 2 of their draft choices. Of course, Alex Austin being one of them, who actually intercepted Josh Allen in a Bills-Patriots game. So this is a tough league. Every team is looking to get marginally better year in, year out. But at this phase, at this point of the offseason, teams are looking to get better via their 90-man roster as they trim the fat to 75, as they then trim the fat down to 53. Question is, can Gable Steveson make the 75-man roster? That's the first question that Gable Steveson has to answer for himself and for his detractors. Because don't get me wrong, as excited as I was about hearing this story, for the fact that I know Gable Steveson very, very well in terms of following his career in Minnesota collegiately, and as well the WWE stuff. I thought at one point, being the combat sports guy that I am, I thought at one point the easiest transition for Gable Steveson was to then go on a UFC kind of MMA mixed martial arts career, which he has denied doing so. Obviously, he's gone two different routes that is kind of against the grain, where he could have gone from collegiate wrestling at Minnesota to a mixed martial arts career. Instead, he went into the WWE. Now he's going into football. There was a guy by the name of Brock Lesnar who did the exact same thing. He went from the collegiate wrestling ranks to the WWE, to the NFL, to the UFC, and then back to the WWE. Now, the key difference here is that Gable Steveson did not have, dare I say, an illustrious WWE career like Brock Lesnar, but the talent, the skill, the athleticism would be reason to make people believe, okay, this is why he's getting a shot in the National Football League. Okay, this is why he's getting a shot in the WWE. Okay, this is why I could close my eyes and envision him stepping into a UFC octagon as a heavyweight and winning a lot of fights. The heavyweight division in the UFC has never been known to be great. And a guy with raw athleticism, maybe he feels like he could do that down the road. Daniel Cormier did. Brock Lesnar did. So maybe he feels like that's something that he could do down the road. But right now, Gable Steveson is a football player. And right now, the Buffalo Bills were the only team to really, I don't want to say it's a decision that required guts, but I will say in the sense that it was, because when you look at these teams at this point in the offseason, they are out there to try to somewhat kick the tires on a player. But there were so many comments, social media wise, whether it's X, whether it's Facebook, whether it's YouTube, that I saw across all platforms, combat sports, UFC, boxing, mixed martial arts, whatever you want to call it, as well as NFL, as well as WWE. So you got four fan bases of four essentially different sports that were so against Gable Steveson for even getting this opportunity. What has he done to earn it? Why would the Bills even go down this road? You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And if you're an individual that feels like, hey, I could be in the NFL, I have what it takes, I can do what they're asking of me in these combine style workouts, I can do what they're asking of me in these NFL open workouts, and multiple teams are coming out and looking at me. Of course, I don't blame him necessarily for feeling like he could go down that road and be that type of player that works his tail off, works his ass off in the training camp format, then plays really well in limited capacity in the preseason. Then you got something. Then you have an opportunity to be an NFL player, whether that's with Buffalo or not. That puts you on that spectrum of that pair, that grouping of NFL players that you might not be the 53rd best player on the team, might be like the 55 to 60, and you got other options now. And I love the fact that the guys have other options outside of the National Football League, other options like the USFL merger with the XFL to make the UFL, things like that. I like that there's more options for players if, in fact, they don't make an NFL team. So this might not be a story that ends as far as Gable Steveson's football career for quite some time, or it might be. At any rate, it's a story that I think the Bills were worthy of taking a chance on, because the position is so shallow at defensive tackle as well. There's a lot to like with this guy. He is charismatic. He is a hard worker. I've already seen him doing things locally in the community at Ilio DiPaglio's events and things like that. I mean, that's pretty cool. restaurant I've been to a time or two, and to see him just here already and embracing it, what's not to love about that? So very excited. I almost wish, for my own selfish reasons, I almost wish he would have signed prior to the Micah Hyde charity softball game, so that I could have had the chance to see him, live up close. That would have been really cool. But nonetheless, they bring him in. They liked what they saw. They liked the fact that the guy can bend. They liked the fact that the guy can run. They liked the fact that the guy has agility for a man his size to be able to move on his feet the way that he can. He has a very low center of gravity for somebody of his size. So you're in that 3-point stance as a defensive lineman coming up from the snap. There's a lot of power there. There's a lot of speed. There's a lot of fluidity that comes from the shot of a double leg takedown or a single leg takedown or a fireman's carry, all wrestling verbiage that I'm speaking here, or a high crotch shot is what they call that in wrestling. So I'm very curious to see how this materializes. I'm very curious for a wide variety of reasons. I feel like there is a chance that this dude could make the team. And it's a very curious opinion for me to say that, because I understand full well how hard it is going to be for him to make the team. But the skills that he already has should be one that proved to be football worthy. And I don't think they would have signed him if they didn't feel the same way that I do. So wanted to start the show with Gable Steveson. Now, I also want to mention that over the course of myself putting content out here for the Buffalo Fan Base Wednesday nights at 8 on the Buffalo Fan Base Podcast Network, as well as all my social media platforms, at Ryan Thomas Take on X, Facebook, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would greatly appreciate it. My subscribers are slowly climbing. I'm putting out YouTube shorts. I'm also putting out written content. So I'm in the process of working on some fantasy football articles for 2024, getting everybody ready for that, some rankings, some write-ups, things like that. And those are available on my Substack. So it's ryanthomas.take.com, ryanthomas.take.substack.com. And what's really cool about Substack is I can see who is viewing it, and I can see the growth, and I can see where the growth is coming from. And I can also keep the people tuned in by having them sign up to my newsletter. So each and every time I post an article on that Substack, you'll get an instant email that says Ryan Thomas wrote such and such. I have 4 just fascinating articles out there right now pertaining to all things sports, whether it's the rookie wide receiver draft class of 2024, the Sabres bringing back Lindy Ruff. I got a really cool retrospective article on Drew Bledsoe's time in Buffalo that I worked on in great detail with some awesome research added to it as I went to certain folks that were privy to Bledsoe's situation coming from New England to Buffalo. That was shortly after the Tom Brady roast. So a lot of really cool journalistic content that I've put out over the last month. And I really appreciate everybody that has been reading it. I want to spread the word about it more often, because I am going to be putting a lot of effort into the Substack and building my newsletter. That's something that I've really wanted to continue to add to my repertoire. And of course, fantasy football articles. I've helped plenty of people win leagues. I've won a lot of leagues over my time. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying 2023 24/7 Buffalo Fandemonium champ, and I plan on repeating. So with that being said, let's go to why competition is extremely important for the Bills in 2024. So obviously I touched on it with Gable Steveson, feeling like that's a move that reeks of, we're going to sign this kid, give him a shot to come in here, put our pads on, put our helmet on, and compete his ass off. We'll find out where he's at. We'll find out where we're at. And really, it's a great experience for everybody. It's a win-win. Even if Gable Steveson doesn't make the 53-man roster, Buffalo's going to find out who else they have. And not only why is it important to have competition, it's important because this team has undergone so many changes. It's a roster that has lost a lot of leadership. And when you lose leadership, you have to find, obviously, the next leaders. But the only way to find that is through those trials and tribulation moments that will persist in training camp with a new defensive coordinator, that will persist in training camp with new weapons on offense. There will be adjustment periods, as there should be. There will be practice point moments, as there should be, for the Buffalo Bills in July and August. And that's what those months are for. The hope is that within those moments that the Bills will have to adjust and make, certain decisions pertaining to their roster, that they'll already be prepared X's and O's wise to be the team that we hope that they can be. But seeding through and sifting through where we will see the competition this upcoming training camp, I think, is really important. As fans, every Bills fan should feel like they have a good grasp on what position groups will offer competition. And to me, I look at a lot of parameters of this team, but you could obviously say wide receiver, and that's the easy route. I'm going to go in just my point of view of leadership. As I mentioned, losing Jordan Poyer, the Bills were willing to lose Jordan Poyer, but they still lost a great leader to that team. They lost a player that had been on this team for 7 seasons. And as of now, I'm going to say as of now, they have also lost Micah Hyde. So who is going to need to step up, or who are the players at the Buffalo Bills safety position that will be competing for a starting roster spot? And I think that the names that pop into my mind are obviously like Cole Bishop, Mike Edwards. Mike Edwards is a veteran. Cole Bishop is a rookie. So it's easy to kind of think of those guys in my mind. But then you have guys like Cam Lewis, you have Taylor Rapp, you have DeMar Hamlin, and you have a group of players that I think will fit within the defense. But most importantly, the question of, based on the competition, how will this actually look? How will this actually, break down? Leadership is huge. And I think the leaders are going to be found in an easy form and fashion. I do want to highlight this comment by Mark here. He said, "Good evening. Loving the Bills roster in 2024. Please note how many of the Bills picks were team captains in college." And that's no secret. That's, as he mentions here, wide receiver, edge, safety. That's a huge, huge point. If Mark was on Around the Horn right now, he'd get like 5 points for that point. And here's why. I think Brandon Beane looked at it as, okay, we lost X amount of leaders. We need to find those leadership type players. Mark took the words right out of my mouth. So with a guy like Keon Coleman, they were able to find that. With a guy like Cole Bishop, they were able to find that. With a guy like Dwayne Carter, captain, 3-time captain at Duke, they were able to find that. So to me, I look at the starting favorites for the safety position to be Cole Bishop, to be Mike Edwards, both listed right now as free safeties. Maybe it could be Cole Bishop and Taylor Rapp. That might be the more accurate long-term projection. But either way, those names being thrown out there would tell a tall tale that is a big point of emphasis for Buffalo. They lost some pieces. They wanted to bring some pieces back in, and they did that. They did that via the draft. They did that via free agency. And I think that will be a huge storyline, rightfully so, in terms of their team, in terms of the makeup of their team. Sean McDermott's always been a secondary in type defensive coach. Seems like he's had a lot of great success with secondaries over the years. They found Poyer, they found Hyde. McDermott worked with, Philly for a few years under Jim Johnson. They had a lot of great safeties back then with Brian Dawkins, Troy Vincent. And of course, Safeties were a huge point of emphasis in Carolina as well when McDermott was there. So really curious to see how the safety position shakes out. But as well, talked about this position before in short kind of quotations and short conversations, but running back is a huge position for me. And I think a lot of the conversation about the wide receiver position, what will the Bills offense look like? I think a lot of signs point to Buffalo being more of a rushing offense as well in 2024. They've invested in the offensive line via free agency, via draft over the last 2 seasons. Got a lot of young, powerful offensive linemen, Cedric Van Pran Granger being one of them. And they also added to the running back position. They added to the running back position in the draft. They added to the running back position post the draft. And to me, Ray Davis was a pick that I mocked to Buffalo on the vast majority of my mocks because I think he's a great contrast to what James Cook offers. James Cook, 5'11", 210, Ray Davis, 5'8", 225, 230. More of like a bowling ball type running back. And the production collegiately at Kentucky was truly astounding. He was the leading touchdown creator, I guess you could say, led the team in touchdowns last season with 17 touchdowns at Kentucky for Ray Davis. And then obviously Frank Gore Jr. Wearing the same number as his dad. His dad was on the Buffalo Bills not so long ago, and his dad was one of the best running backs in NFL history. Saying that, people are going to be like, oh my God, what about Emmitt Smith? No, statistically, Emmitt Smith was one of those guys. Statistically, Frank Gore was one of those guys. He's one of the highest rushers in NFL history. He played for what felt like 30 years, but he produced everywhere he played. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the second generation kind of skill set translates. There's a lot of second generation type players coming into the NFL. Marvin Harrison Jr. being one of them, Frank Gore Jr. being another one, Braden Rice being another one. In the case of Luke McCaffrey, he's a third generation player. Well, technically brother of Christian McCaffrey, so you could say father, son, youngest son. So second generation. So whether it was, the fact that Frank Gore ran for 16,000 yards exactly between the Niners, the Colts, the Dolphins, the Bills, and the Jets, or just the fact that I think Frank Gore Jr., it seems like a lot of these guys that are the offspring of legends, they want to forge their own path while paying respect to the predecessor, their father. And that's a huge, huge point of emphasis for me whenever I've watched a Frank Gore Jr. interview, whether it was his collegiate interviews, whether it was his NFL interviews. Frank Gore Jr. just wants to be himself. And I think that the game will be similar. You blink and you might see the same. You squint, looks like the same exact guy. They look exactly alike, which is awesome on the field and off the field. But at the same time, I think it's going to be a very interesting battle between both of those guys, as well as Ty Johnson. This is James Cook's backfield. Do the Bills carry 4 running backs going into 2024? I would not be shocked. I would not be shocked. I would not, look at this position and say to myself, this is a position to scoff at. This is a very important position. And I know that you'll hear all this stuff about this game is a passing league, and some of that might be true. Maybe the way the running back position is valued to each team in the NFL has changed, but the position itself is still very important. So I think that there's 2 things can be true. And in this case, I'd say that the running back position is important, but the way it's valued has changed dramatically. And I think 2 things can be true on that. So running back room, I think, is groomed for the future, and James Cook is leading the way. So, of course, I want to get to a comment here from Dr. Bruce. He says, What do you think about our drafted rookie Van Pran Granger becoming our new center and keeping McGovern at guard? I think that that would be something that is realistic. It's a realistic thought to think that Van Pran Granger, who started every year at Georgia, who was a captain in his own right, led their offensive line unit to great success. Georgia's been one of the best collegiate programs in the nation for the last 5, 6 years, and he was a big reason why. Maybe he was an unsung reason why. Maybe they looked at guys like Cook or all those defensive players, the Jalen Carters and studs, Jordan Davis and guys like that are all on the Eagles practically, as why the Georgia Bulldogs were what they were. But you got to look at the whole picture, and he was definitely a part of that picture. To me, I thought he was one of the biggest steals of the Bills draft. I thought that he would be like a third or fourth round guy. I believe Buffalo drafted him in the 5th round. I don't have that in front of me, but I think he was a 5th round pick, which was huge for the Bills. And I look at it, the whole unit, the whole picture, Deion Dawkins, left tackle, Connor McGovern at guard, right, left guard, Van Pran Granger at center, Osiris Torrance at right guard. Having Van Pran Granger and Osiris Torrance right next to each other for the next 5 to 10 years would be massive for this team. And any team that has any success over a long period of time, whether it's been the Patriots, whether it's been the Colts, whether it's been the Steelers, those are the teams that are coming in my head right now. They had long-term offensive linemen. We had that at one point, right, Bruce? We had that at one point with House Ballard and Will Wolford and all those dudes that were protecting Jim Kelly. So Kent Hall, especially one of the greatest centers of all time. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame personally, but that's just my opinion. But if you could keep that unit together for a long period of time, I know some are a little bit older than others, but I'm talking just specifically Van Pran Granger at center, Osiris Torrance at right guard, Spencer Brown. He has come a long way as the right tackle. There were serious doubters of Spencer Brown, whether he would be, a player that could battle back and become what they believed that he could. And I think he's great. I thought he was fantastic last year. So great question. Keep him coming. Fire away. So next, of course, I want to talk about specifically the wideout position. And I was going to talk about the offensive line, but due to that question, I feel like I touched on it there. But the wideout position, low risk, high reward buzz on wide receiver Chase Claypool. That is for real. But why is that dominating? It seems like Facebook pages, Bills Facebook pages, football Facebook pages, Twitter feeds, talking about Chase Claypool showing up and showing out at OTAs. The talent of Chase Claypool has always been there. It's never been, to me, about his lack of talent. It's been about a lack of execution, and a little bit of it, I would say, is situational. And it pertains to, you go from the Pittsburgh Steelers, where you were expected to be like a wide receiver 2. You get buried down the depth chart with some guys that are already there. Then they draft some other players and decide to go in a different direction outside of yourself, trading you to the Chicago Bears. Now, I say this in a joking fashion, and I said this to my dad, and he burst out laughing, but I think I could put together a better two-hand touch football team if I were to play two-hand touch against Justin Fields, Chase Claypool, and such. I think we could do pretty well with the offensive line that the Bears have had going up against that offensive line. I can get some guys from my high school team, and we can make that a fun Friday Night Lights game. That team has been a disaster over the course of the last 20 years since they went to the Super Bowl against the Colts. They've been terrible. So it's really hard to judge a player who has been in really bad situations over the whole span of his career outside of Pittsburgh, of course. Going to Miami, we know very well that the only thing Miami's got is elite wide receivers and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Now they're bringing Odell Beckham Jr. for a cup of coffee to see what he can still do or what he can't do. So Chase Claypool, this is the best opportunity I think that he has had practically since Pittsburgh, since he was a rookie, to actually produce, to actually show what he is capable of. This is a guy that had 8 touchdowns his rookie year. I believe he had 7 in his sophomore year. Went from like 1,000 yards to 800 yards, or 800 to 900, or something like that. He was productive his first 2 years in the NFL. So I don't want to hear the bust conversation, because there's a lot of players that fall within the stratosphere that he's in right now, of kind of on the outside looking in, but extremely young and an extremely raw talent that I think the Bills were brilliant to give a shot to, see what he can bring to the table, see if he can offer anything to a new look position at the wide receiver position for the Buffalo Bills. So we'll get some takes on that. All right. So Kagan Scooter's got me. He says he has all the right tools. Bruce McKellar says Claypool's physical traits are elite. If he gets his head right, he can be a great addition and resurrect his career. I agree. And I watched him almost every Saturday at Notre Dame. This is a guy that has a catch radius. He can catch the ball high. He can catch it low. It's not like the guy has bricks for hands. I truly feel that it's a situation by situational kind of cluster, you know what, in terms of going from place to place. It's just not the right fit. Kagan Scooter's got me too. He says, I'll be your quarterback. I really feel that there's a lot of guys out there that are average Joes that could play a two-hand touch football game against the Bears and play pretty well, especially these Bears teams of the last few years. I'm not talking now. Now they got some guys. They got Roma Dunze. I'm not too high on Caleb Williams, but they got some guys that I think will be making them better. So still have not had a 1,000-yard wide receiver in like 50, 60 years, but that's another story. All right. So as we wrap up the show here, I like to keep things 35 to 45 minutes, but I always like to save like the hot takes for last. I always like to come in hot as the end of the show comes near, right? So let's talk about it. Stephon Diggs, former Buffalo Bills wide receiver, felt the need to answer a question that was asked of him by a Houston sports reporter on his time in Buffalo and his exit in Buffalo. Diggs went on to say that Josh Allen was his boy, and he wouldn't be standing where he's standing in front of the Houston media as a member of the Houston Texans without the career that he had had with Josh Allen these last 4 years in Buffalo. He also went on to talk about his time in Minnesota and how Minnesota traded him. It almost seemed like they were trying to prove a point trading him to Buffalo, which he's not the first player to say that. He certainly won't be the last. Most players that have never played here before, that played in one place in the NFL, believe that if they're traded to Buffalo, it's almost considered a death sentence. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of bad notions and bad history and bad judgment associated with Buffalo. Thurman Thomas said it best. A lot of people have a perceived notion of Buffalo before they get here. Once they get here, they never want to leave, right? Unless you're Stephon Diggs. And in the case of Stephon Diggs, I think that I'd be not necessarily jumping the gun when I say that he's going to look back on his career one day and maybe he'll have earned in excess over 100 million, 120 million or something along those lines, if not more. I don't have the contracts in front of me, but he'll have made hundreds of millions of dollars by the time he retires. But at the same time, he'll look back on his career without a Super Bowl, knowing that his best years of his career were in Buffalo and thinking, I'm not playing in the NFL and Josh Allen still is. That's going to be a real conversation that Stephon Diggs is going to have with himself probably within the next 3-4 years, if not sooner. So to me, when I watch Stephon Diggs talk about his experience playing in Buffalo, talking about how him and Josh Allen are boys, if they were boys, why couldn't they make it work? if they were boys, the reports, all things considered, between Allen and Diggs would be largely untrue. So I'm going to play both sides of the coin here. If the reports were untrue that Diggs was not satisfied here in Buffalo, then we got some really fake news out there, pun intended, for all the right reasons. Fake news out there, if in fact there is some, that's bad, right? That's not good to have fake news out there, people saying that Diggs is disgruntled because of Josh Allen, when that might have never been the case. Maybe Diggs was frustrated at Sean McDermott. Maybe Diggs was frustrated over the fact that the franchise kind of continued to spin its wheels as far as replacing Brian Dable, replacing him with Ken Dorsey, when Dorsey was never the OC that Diggs wanted. Now, it may sound like I'm making excuses for Stephon Diggs. I'm not. I know full well that Buffalo could no longer continue to carry the $20+ million cap hit for the services of Stephon Diggs. I know very well that the captain, no captain, and the Buffalo Bills are in a point, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, where they need leaders, and they need leaders without having leaders on the team that are the complete opposite of a leader. So there are so many layers and so many petals, I guess you could say, to this flower that was blooming and just died all of a sudden on a random day as the news broke on a morning where I was recording my show, talking about one thing entirely, scrapped it, and had to announce that Stephon Diggs was traded. I was shocked when I saw the news. I was. Part of me still is. But as time has worn on, the only thing I can think when it comes to Stephon Diggs, wasn't happy in Minnesota with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is no Josh Allen. Wasn't happy in Buffalo for whatever reason. He was not happy. You can say that Josh Allen is his guy. You can say that he wouldn't be where he is today without him. Where he is today is taking a step back. Rather than working with a perennial all-pro quarterback for his 5th straight season, Stephon Diggs is working now with a quarterback that is only in his 2nd year in the NFL. Granted, C.J. Stroud had one of the best rookie seasons I have ever seen, but at the very least, could be argued that Houston made a move that they didn't need to make. Could be argued that Houston looks at Stephon Diggs as a means to an end anyway, being that he's only on a 1-year deal. As soon as he was traded from Buffalo to Houston, they reworked that contract, and Diggs and his time in Houston will be short-lived. Will it be a positive come the short-lived end to his upcoming career in Houston? I doubt it. If history tells us anything, it's that it continues to repeat itself within Stephon Diggs' career, playing on his 3rd team in his age 31 season, coming off the worst second-half stretch in any season of his career. You don't get better as you get older. You don't get faster as you get older. You don't get stronger as you get older. It's going to be a very interesting time for Stephon Diggs that's awaiting him. It's a time that he set himself up for. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's show. It was really great to be back live everywhere you listen, everywhere you watch. Thank you so much. Subscribe to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on YouTube, X, at Ryan Thomas Take. And of course, I will see you guys next week, 8 o'clock, right here. Thank you. And last and certainly not least, go Bills.